Hello and welcome back. And in today's lecture, I would like to talk about BPMN information artifacts. So there are a couple of them, and it's important to know how to use them. So basically, all information artifacts represent the data. So either the ones being inputted or outputted inside during the process, or as an aftermath of the process being completed. There are different types of information artifacts in BPMN 2.0, and I would like to go over all of them so you have a better understanding on how to use them and when to use them. This is the first artifact we're going to be looking at, data object. And before we go any further, there's a quick note I would like to mention. Unfortunately, in Draw.io, there isn't a separate icon for all of the data objects, but most of them are kind of merged into this symbol. So I'll cut the video here, and now you can see all information artifacts here on the left. We'll go over them one by one just now, but before we do that, if you want to create any of the artifacts shown here in this row, all you need to do is to click on the default data object symbol and then kind of click on the mini symbol inside of it and just delete it. And the same goes for this. And that's how you get your plain data object. And the same way you can get any other information artifact in this column. So now let's quickly delete this. And now let's go through every information artifact one by one. And let's start with data object. So data object is a very easy concept to understand. It basically represents information flowing through the current process. Like letters or emails or any business information. Let's take a look at a quick example of creating an invoice. So you have purchase order and you need to create an invoice. And we're going to use data objects to show what's happening with the data. So we have two data objects in this example. One is called purchase order, another one invoice. All we need to do is connect them to this activity. But when we connect a data object to an activity, we can't just use this sequence flow. We need to change it so the line will be just dotted line. And then we connect the action to this data object, again with the dotted line. And this shows us that data from purchase order comes to the action of creating invoice. Then we use it in order to create invoice. And then we send that data to the invoice that can be used throughout the rest of this process. So it's very easy to understand this. The most important thing is not to forget to use the dotted line. Okay, so now let's take a look at the second most used business process model notation information artifact called a data store. It's basically represents a database, and the symbol for it is located here. So all you need to do is drag and drop as any other element in BPMN. And this element is very useful. So data store is, as any database, a place containing data objects that must be persisted beyond the duration of the process instance. For example, the data object will be terminated once the process is over. You will not be able to use it in following processes or in other business process models. However, with data store, you can have information saved there throughout the whole duration of your process. And it doesn't matter how many process models it has to be used. The same rules apply to data store as to the data object. You just need to remember to connect it with a dotted line and to name the database accordingly. Let's take a quick look at another example just so you have a better understanding of it. So in this example, we have to retrieve client information from the database and store it in a client info data object. So the example is pretty self-explanatory. We have a database, the data comes to the activity. In the activity, we transfer the data from the database into a newly created data object that then we send out as an independent data object. Okay, so now that you have learned how data store and data object interact with each other, as well as how they work on their own, I would like to talk about the last three information artifacts in BPMN, and I would like to start with this element called a collection of. You need to put the symbol of 3 parallel vertical lines on a data object or data input or data output, and this will indicate that this information artifact is not holding a single value but a number of them. For example, a list of names or a table of content. So there are multiple values stored in this one information artifact, and that's very useful when you need to fill in a table. And so instead of having a lot of data objects before your activity, you can just have one collection of data objects indicated by this, and that will make model more readable for users. So it's actually very simple. Okay, so now data input and data output are of the same type. So data input is an external input for the entire process, and data output is data result of entire process. So I'll just show you a quick example and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So we have a random process in which we take data from outside of this process, then we perform some actions with it, and after that we need to transfer this data outside the process so we can use it in another process. To indicate that the data that we're using is coming from outside the current process, we're gonna use the data input symbol. So people understand that this data comes from somewhere else and they'll need to check other models to find it. And then to indicate that we're sending the data outside of the process when the process ends, we'll need to put a data output symbol. So it's actually very, very simple. In the end, all information artifacts are very, very simple. They just represent information that we're working with in our processes. One last thing I want to show you before we end today's lecture might actually come very useful to you when you're going to be creating actual business models. We're going to delete all of this, and I'm going to quickly put an example up. Here it is. It's just a basic retrieve client information and then update details process. And there are 2 types of modeling this process, and both are correct according to Business Process Model and Notation 2.0. So it is completely up to you which one to use. I personally prefer to use the first variant just because it's easier for me that way, because in BPMN all other elements are connected to each other and I just like to keep it that way. But this one does look neater and it requires less space. But if you go with this variant of modeling, do not forget that this is not an arrow. So this is just a straight dotted line. So you do not have a pointy head. And yeah, but that's it. And thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and until next time, happy modeling.